Well, alright everyone, welcome back to the hillside. Today I'm going to talk about fall planting and timing in general. How timing is everything. Okay, so I did a little experiment this year, and I always encourage you guys to experiment every year because you never know. You might find a better way, a different way, something more efficient, something that just produces better results. Who knows? So this year, on August 3rd, I seeded lettuce and beets and some broccolis and cabbages and turnips and all kinds of stuff in in the cell trays, and they were doing just fine and they were growing just fine. But then we had a gigantic just hot streak. It was 93, 94 plus for about 10 days straight. So all of my plants outside started getting burned. So I had to replant some things, but I did learn from my mistakes. So over here I got some beets that I did grow, and I planted these in the bed here about 4 days ago. They were about 2 to 3 weeks old in the pots, and I want to show you over here what not to do. This was also an experiment. On August 3rd, when I planted seeds indoors in the cell trays I was talking about, I planted these. Now these sad examples of turnips are an example, an illustration, if you will, of what happens when you plant your fall crops too early in the soil. Now this being a raised bed, and like I said, being ambiently in the 90s with high humidity, way above average temperature for this time, even for summertime, they are suffering horribly. I'm going to pull them out after this video and replant the turnips. And here is some fennel here that kind of suffered the same fate. It is not happy whatsoever. So when I talk about timing, you need to think backwards. These are all basic things we all know when looking at the fall garden. Is you count backwards from your frost date, you plant the seeds, etc., etc. We know that, okay? Look on the package and it'll say start 4 to 6 weeks before your final frost, start these indoors, transplant them out. They're going to do just fine in the cooler weather, and that's fine. But also, you need to look at the weather. So we are just now dealing with the remnants in the last bit of Hurricane Ida, now Tropical Depression Ida, passing through. So hopefully everyone who was affected by that storm is doing okay, as it has dropped a tremendous amount of rain for us, and I can only imagine in other states where they got it much, much worse. But anyways, without that extreme example of a tropical system rolling through, I planted these the day or two before I knew that system was coming through because, well, it's going to rain. It was going to be cooler. I looked at the forecast. So these fall crops were planted ahead of a nice cool trend and some rain. So do keep that in mind when you plant your fall crops, to look at the extended forecast. If there's a lot of rain forecasted, you might want to get out there and plant them ahead of time. If you notice that there's going to be a really warm streak next week, maybe a little too much coming up, you might want to keep those inside, or like I did, where I had them in the cell trays, I kept them in the shade. They got some sun, it wasn't full shade, but they were protected from the intense afternoon heat. I kept them watered. They did just fine. And then before I transferred them out into the wide open onto this raised bed here. So let me show you a couple other examples of my fall plantings and kind of give you an idea about what you can maybe try this year in your garden as well. Okay, so this isn't quite fair because, well, technically I didn't plant these. Okay, this is the kale that had self-seeded. I did the video Free Kale Forever. Do check that one out, as will kind of show you just how to promote longevity of your plants by self-sowing and keeping that cycle going. But these plants, they seeded in July. Okay, the mother plant died. It seeded in the hottest part of summer, and you know what? All this kale has germinated all on its own. Okay, now I tried germinating some kale indoors with this last batch of seeds, and it got spindly. It didn't look healthy. It couldn't make it happy whatsoever. But this self-sown kale is amazing. It is super thick, and I'm sorry about the deer netting kind of in the way. That's what's obstructing your view if you're kind of wondering what's going on. But long story short, I want the kale, not the deer. So moving on. But look how thick this kale is. Look how lush this kale is. It's doing just fine. It's self-sowed. It germinated on its own. Now, as obviously these plants are far too close together to get a legitimate massive crop, I can harvest the baby leaves on it, which would be fine. But sometimes, you need to look at the patterns that nature provides for you. So brassicas are the biennial plant. They're naturally going to flower and set seed in the summer, in the hottest part of the year. Okay, and you know what? Nobody went around and spaced these evenly. No one actually even buried them in the ground. They just sat on top of the soil. I did literally nothing. And nature found a way to plant itself, to propagate itself. This is doing wonderful, as opposed to the other crops that I tried to set out and that just withered in the heat. This kale has endured all the same exact heat without any negative consequences. It's thriving in this raised bed. Only thing I had to do is make sure I kept it watered as it did dry out, because it was in the 90s and really, really hot. So with a little bit of care, do as little work as possible to get the best results possible. So look to nature, copy the patterns, and you'll do much better than trying to fight the trend and start seedlings of cool weather crops during the heat of summer. So let me go ahead and show you something else. All right, so here on the front porch, I have just, I grew a bunch of lettuce from seed here. Okay, and this is more in the, the Charles Dowding method, just overseeding and then pricking out individual seedlings into their trays. I find this saves tons of space as opposed to trying to put one seed per cell, and it saves a lot of compost and a lot of potting soil in the long run. However, just this little section right here is what I cleared off, and I had enough seedlings to plant. This is a 72 cell tray, and I have a couple, 3 or 4 6-packs as well, so well over 80, 90 plants. I have 200 lettuce plants here, you know what I mean? So it's very simple to just do this, but like I was trying to explain to you, this is actually on my front porch. So it does get some sunlight, but it's also protected. It does get a nice shade from the evening hot blazing sun, because if I put these seedlings outside in the open air, these little lettuce seedlings are going to get fried, okay? If they had experienced a 90-degree heat wave like we had, I don't know what to tell you. If they somehow survived, they would not be doing healthy at all, for that matter. So these guys are thriving. I have not fertilized them. This is just some potting soil. I pricked these out last night. They've been outside, and like I said, the hurricane, the tropical depression kind of came through, so it's been overcast. It's only been in the 70s, which is awesome. It feels amazing how it's about 20 degrees cooler than it was this time last week. So this is the kind of time that these plants are going to thrive. Okay, so that aside, whenever you do plant your fall crops, don't rush to put them outside in the heat, okay? Because one bad day, I had an entire flat, and I'm not completely embarrassed to admit it, because I'm sure everyone else done it too, but I completely forgot to water one. I've missed an entire tray of kale, like I mentioned before, and it fried probably 2/3 of it. 2/3 of the kale, and I believe some collards were in cilantro were in that flat as well. Just absolutely melted in the absolute heat. I was able to recover a few and transplant them out, but it could have been a complete loss if had I not gotten home from work just in time to rescue just that little batch that had survived. So, do take care. Maybe look at little microclimates in your garden or in your property. If you have a small porch or something, find the place that may be a little bit protected from the most intense heat and the sunlight of the day when dealing with these little babies. Okay. So I do hope that gave you guys a little bit of inspiration of, starting your fall crops, not getting discouraged at maybe some failures you might have had along the way, because that's how you learn. So one thing I do try to encourage other people to do, that I don't always take my own advice, which I'm really trying to do better with, folks, is making records, okay, writing stuff down. I know for a fact, I'm going to write this down, August 3rd, way too early to plant spinach. You know why? These little baby spinaches, they started off great, and you know why I don't have them anymore? Because this tray right here used to have spinach, and they were about 3 weeks old, and every one of them started to bolt. I mean, they were 2 inches tall, starting to try to put on flowers in their life cycle. So I had to replant the spinach. So note to self, don't plant spinach on August 3rd, at least where I live, because it's just far too warm still. So you can't, you're not winning anything by starting extra early, okay? There's no bonus points for that. There's only negative consequences, okay? So fall gardening is not like spring gardening, where you're afraid of a cold snap coming through and killing off your precious little tomato pepper seedling that you put out too early. Now the heat might actually be what is going to be the deterrent for success going forward, and because you're not starting tomatoes this late in the season, you're not starting peppers. I mean, maybe if you had a plant growing inside and you want to stick it out in the garden to see it one last hoorah before the frost set in, you may get something out of it, you may not, I don't know. But there you go. So there's a look at some fall planting, some little advice along the way. Hopefully you learn from my mistakes, and hopefully you have a very successful fall crop this year. So I do thank you guys for watching. Please consider subscribing if you want to learn about more plants, growing things, and just having fun getting your hands dirty out in the garden. All right, guys, until next time, this is Dave, your hillside gardener, signing off. Bye-bye.